Hi, thanks very much for coming back so promptly. We're going to move on to two really excellent sessions this afternoon. The first one is about motorsport and the changing role of fan engagement in Formula One. And I'm delighted that my colleague Daniel Johnson will be taking this panel. Dan is a man who doesn't need a Formula One car. His career is going so quickly and so fast. Daniel Johnson.
Thanks very much, Jim. First of all, if I could just introduce the panel. We have, first to my right, Alejandro Gag, the CEO of Formula E Holdings. Before he was involved in Formula E, Alejandro is the youngest ever Spaniard to be elected to the European Parliament, I believe, when he was 28. He's controlled or bought the TV rights in Spain. He's managed a GP2 team. And he also once owned QPR with Bernie Ecclestone and Flavio Briatore. Thankfully, he got out at the right time, it seems. Then we have Rob Bloom from McLaren, who is the group head of digital. He joined the company in 2012 and has overseen a massive explosion in their digital presence, and they recently launched an app as well. Just as far as Rob goes, don't blame him for how the car's doing. It's not his fault. And then finally, we have Matthew Carter, the chief executive of Lotus. He joined the team in January 2014. And it's fair to say, with all that's been going on in Formula One, he's had a busy year or so. So just to very briefly introduce the subject of fan engagement in motor racing. In the old days, how it would have been is Bernie Ecclestone would do his best to get as much money as possible from TV rights deals, and then people would flood to the race events themselves. But over the past few years, with the advent of the internet, this has all been changing. In 2008, 600 million people watched Formula One globally on television. Last year, that was just 425 million. And the German Grand Prix in Michael Schumacher's pomp in the early 2000s would have 120,000 people there. It's not even happening this year. Just to say a quote from Bernie Ecclestone himself, it's not as if the powers that be in motor racing have fully embraced this agenda. Just to read a quote from Bernie in an interview last year, he said, "I'm not interested in tweeting, Facebook, and whatever this nonsense is. I couldn't see any value in it. I don't know why people want to get the so-called younger generation involved." He then went on to say how people who are young weren't of great worth because they couldn't afford to buy a Rolex. However, things are slowly changing, and Formula One this year has massively upped its output with regards to social media. In Alejandro's sport, Formula E, they've pioneered something called Fan Boost, whereby fans can vote for a particular driver who they want to have a power boost during the race, and teams like Rob's and Matthew's are more active than ever. Bernie's wife, Fabiana's, even on Instagram, and often posts photos from the grid around the world, so who knows, maybe one day Bernie will be on Twitter. So if I could turn, first of all, to Matthew. Why is all this fan engagement stuff really important? Without having too big a pop at Bernie, you know, why does this all matter?
I think from my point of view, I'm trying to run a business, and I'm trying to run it as a business. So we have to get, obviously there's only two forms of income that come into a Formula One team. One is the money that Bernie gives us, which is the TV rights and the prize money, which is divided. And the only other element that we get money from is our sponsors. So sponsorship is a huge part of our business. And I have to listen to what the sponsors want, and it's the sponsors that are reaching out to the younger generation. It's the sponsors that realise that the older generation, the likes of the people that buy the Rolex and that Bernie's talking about, they're not the people that are coming through, and they're not the people that necessarily our sponsors are trying to sell to. So it becomes very important for us to be able to sell more to our sponsors than just a logo on a car. I think the days of a logo flying around a racetrack on a car and nothing else have long gone. We have to offer our sponsors much more, and social media and interaction with the public on social media is of huge importance to us.
And Alejandro, obviously you're having to build Formula E up from nothing basically, so you've got to grow that fan base yourselves. How difficult a task has that been? And obviously this is a massive part of what you're doing, isn't it?
Yeah, well, first of all, hello. I think Bernie was joking when he said that. Honestly, I mean, I do think Bernie was joking. It's the classic Bernie joke. But in that, I mean, it didn't come from a joke, and everybody has been beating him on that one since then, which is well deserved because that's a difficult joke to kind of get through. But he was joking. And going on the Rolex, something that one of our sponsors, it's not Rolex, but it's TAG, told me is that they don't market for the people who can buy TAG. They market for the people who will be able to buy TAG in 5, 10, or 15 years. That's the market they want. We have so obviously we are very, very small and we don't compare ourselves with Formula One. But our main obvious disadvantage, if you look at Formula One and us, is, well, we have many, but obviously the history of Formula One, it's the history of Formula One. And that makes the brand so strong. So you have from Schumacher to Fangio to Senna to the whole incredible history. We have zero history. Well, now we have 7 races of history. So we can risk much more. And actually we have to risk much more. If we don't, we'll get nowhere. And that's why we can do things like fan boost and other concepts that maybe for Formula One are more difficult to, and would be even less acceptable to the fans of Formula One. So I'm a big, obviously a big fan of Formula One. But for me to see the fan boost in Formula One, even for me, would be more difficult than to accept it in Formula E, which is a kind of new technology, new brand, different thing. No, so just that consideration to make at this point. But yeah, we've been building Formula E since the beginning with a very with a big focus on the millennial generation and on the digital engagement of the fans.
And how have people responded to that? Well?
Well, yeah, they responded very well. I mean, the main, we're trying to do many things, but it's not easy. Because interactivity is a word that everyone says everything has to be interactive, but then how do you really make something interactive? So we made up this fan boost concept, which is that the fans vote online in different platforms, and then the 3 drivers who get more votes get an additional push of energy during the race. So actually the votes of the fans have a real effect on the result of the race. So when we put this idea to the FIA, they said, well, no, that's impossible because you will affect the result of the race. And we said, well, that's exactly the point. If you don't, then why people would vote? So it is not 100% the skill of the driver and or the car, but it's also the fan input that will decide the end result of the race, which is what we want. But I'm not saying that's good for everybody. It's good for us because we can do it, and fans love it. I mean, what we want to do now is to extend the vote because the FIA doesn't let us have the vote open during the race. I would like to have the vote open halfway through the race, then the results are counted and made public, and then drivers can use the boost at the end of the race, so fans can really interact in the race. So if they want the guy going second to win, they can vote for him. But if the guy is last, they can choose another guy. That makes it much more interactive. So we're working on it, and we hope to get the clearance soon for that.
Rob, what do you think about ideas like fan boosts? And are there other ideas you've thought of different ways of being interactive and allowing fans an actual influence in what's going on?
Yeah, it's an excellent creative idea of getting fans involved. And I think, by way of your introduction, you described the way that McLaren plus other Formula One teams have evolved in this space. And we are increasingly looking for new opportunities to get fans involved and bridge that proximity gap, that traditional proximity gap between Formula One and the audience. I think from a McLaren point of view, we're very active on online, social and mobile. And we are looking at ways to try and create the stories and the right platforms and the right devices that address a very multi-layer Formula One audience. So, we're very fortunate in Formula One to have so many stories to tell, and Formula One means lots of different things to lots of different people. So how do we tell the technology story to the audience? How can we tell the story of in-between races to an audience, and what's the right platforms and devices to do so? And for other audiences, it's the thrill and the magic of racing, and how do we bring them closer to that action? So it's really about understanding through data analytics what's working, what's not working, constantly optimizing and living in this state of beta with your content strategy. What are the ways that you can bring the fans closer to the teams?
One of the big stories as far as McLaren were last year, I hope you don't mind me bringing this up, was whether or not Jenson Button was going to stay as a driver. And that was one case where you had fans engaging heavily with you, but it probably wasn't always in the most positive way because they wanted Jensen to stay on and people weren't sure if he was. How do you have a sort of company policy of dealing with that, and how do you go about dealing with all the good engagement you get as well as the bad stuff that's going to come?
Well, you know, you're going into the role of digital, and it has a business, brand and communications objective. So obviously in that particular story, the brand and comms angle was particularly important. But, you know, I'm sure everyone in this room is a sports fan and is passionate about their team, whether it be a football team or a Formula One team. And it's important that we recognise that part of that passion is the thrill of winning and the disappointment when you're not doing quite as well, or there's a negative story around the brand. And that's what makes such brilliant, sticky, engaged fan bases. And you know, we have to expect that. We are a sports team, that's what we expect. And ultimately, you know, it is the passion of that fan base and the distribution ability of that large audience that, if you go back to the business requirement and what was said in terms of the requirement from our partners to use this space to activate in, you know, partners are creating brilliant content, lots of brands are creating brilliant content, but we have a very emotionally engaged, sticky, large audience that can perform a distribution role for that content, and of course working with that partner to make sure that it's the right type of content is paramount to its success.
Matthew, since you took over, it's been everyone knows a tough financial time in motorsport and in Formula One in particular. As CEO, how do you go about, you touched on this before, how do you go about justifying the spend that you have to do on this side of engaging fans? Because it must be very easy when you're looking for areas to save a bit of money to say, well, we just, you know, we can't afford to do that. How do you justify it to your owners and bosses?
Being really cold-hearted about it, the way that I justify it is that it's the way that we get our sponsors engaged. And exactly as was said just then, I mean, one of our sponsors, for example, EMC, are not a particularly sexy brand, but the minute that they launch anything on their social media, on our social media with them attached to it, it gets an extra couple of million people looking at it and viewing it. And for them, that's huge. So just to be able to reach out to a bigger market is something that we can offer. So we've really pushed, you know, as we touched on before, we've really pushed on our social media to offer our sponsors a wider audience. And it's an instant wider audience as well. So the minute that they are retweeted or the minute that they appear on our Facebook page, they're instantly being revealed to an extra 2.5 million people.
This was before you were CEO, but there was a tweet that Lotus put out a few years ago when Kimi Räikkönen moved to Ferrari. If anyone's seen it or not seen it, just look up Kimi Räikkönen Lotus tweet and you'll see what I mean. It involved 2 rabbits, and that's all I'm going to say. You know, that's something that Lotus were sort of have become known for. Yep. Is that something that's changing, or what's the rationale behind that kind of strategy?
I think for, I mean, that was Twitter, and I think Twitter is probably a little bit more instant than Facebook. And I think the way that Twitter works and the way that we get the fans engaged with Twitter is by that immediate reaction to things. And it's a fine line to draw, but I don't think you can sterilise it particularly. And we were talking before, I mean, one of our sponsors from last year was Coca-Cola, and any tweet that they put out had to be run by their legal department before they could put it onto their Twitter page. And therefore, by the time they'd done that, it was out of date. So you have to give the likes of the digital guys some leeway. It was a funny tweet. It certainly got a lot of coverage. It was based around our team. It was based around something that Kimi had said he would never leave and go back to Ferrari. And it was kind of how we all felt. I mean, I wasn't there at the time. It's how the factory felt at the time that they'd been treated by Kimi. And I think if you start to sterilise it, then you start to lose people because they start to believe it's just some sort of a corporate. Whereas at the moment, we certainly at Lotus, and probably sets us aside from some of the other teams at the moment, we do have quite an individual flair and individual style to the way that we tweet, which upsets people within our own team. I mean, Alan Permain, our sporting director, is quite vocal in a lot of things, and he falls out with the people that run the Twitter page regularly because he feels that they're almost degrading the race drivers or the race team, or they're almost making light of things that are happening during a race. So we'll quite often comment if our drivers spin or if our driver overshoots in the pit lane or something, they'll quite often make comments. But I think you have to push the boundaries to keep the people engaged.
Alejandro, on the sort of on that line, is that something you guys ever considered, because you're coming up from a low base, to try and be punchier and really get yourselves out there, or how have you tried to portray the brand through social media?
Well, it's interesting what you say, because you gave two examples. One is about Kimi, one is about Jenson. We are noticing very much that what interests people in social media more and more are the persons, not the teams. I mean, if you look at football, Cristiano Ronaldo has more followers than Real Madrid, which is a paradox, but it's like that. And it's neither good or bad, but the world is more and more, and social media has made the world also very celebrity driven. I mean, when Leo DiCaprio comes to our race, the social media readings go through the roof, and if he tweets, even more, and if and it's like that. So it's very important, like you were saying, the stories are very important. I mean, in Formula One, if you look at the problems between, the fight or whatever they have between Nico and Lewis Hamilton, is driving the attention of the people. They want to know what's happening with the persons. So we have also very good drivers, which are also known to and they have big followings, and we really focus on those kind of stories. We're starting, and of course the profile of the fights or whatever they have between them is not so big as the one in Formula One, obviously, but I think that's the way to go. And then like I said, we have not that much heritage, so we can be very punchy and nobody really cares.
I think that's the difference. I think it's the difference between the heritage and the classic, and Formula One has got a built-up fan base. I mean, we back 2 years ago came up with an idea of putting a tweet button on the steering wheel for the drivers. So as they were driving, they could hit tweet, and it would send a picture from the onboard camera, which would be live tweeted. And the FIA stopped it instantly. And they just, and to be fair, at the time we were talking about it, I thought that was maybe pushing the boundaries a little bit. And the people, the governance of F1 were just like, this is I'm in no way degrading Formula E, but we're a serious sport. These are guys that are really, really fighting to the, and to have them tweeting or for any of that sort of stuff was just killed stone dead instantly. And that's not to say it won't happen in the future, but it's, there is that, the sort of the classic Formula One history that's already there. So we can't sort of push the boundaries as much as Formula One. Formula E, sorry.
Talking about that, the paddock in Formula One is sort of, and always has been, or designed to be, in sort of an exclusive place, and that doesn't always make people like you, Rob, doesn't make your job easy. Do you wish sometimes there was more scope to really bring fans a bit closer, to use things like Periscope or Vine or anything like that, because you're quite restricted in what you can actually do?
No, I mean, similarly, we're a 52-year-old Formula One team that has got rich heritage and history, and it's really important that McLaren defines its content strategy and how it does position it within the tools that we do have available to us. So we might not be able to do a Periscope, but we can do live tweeting throughout the event. We can put one of the team in the back of the garage, be transcribing the radio chat on McLaren Live, which is one of the things that we do. So there are ways and means of being able to tell the story, working within the content opportunities that we have available to us.
And in the meantime, we profit from that heritage, and we try to we do Periscope massively. We did from the garages everywhere in Monaco, and it worked amazingly well. But we are more free, basically.
In terms of engaging people at the event, because going to watch a motor race, it can be brilliant, but a lot of the time you don't see everything that's going on. So what have you tried to do in Formula E to make it more of an event, so there's more stuff going on than just the race? And what, Matthew and Rob, more do you think we should be trying to do in Formula One?
Well, we need that, because our race is shorter and is I would say it has less kind of importance than a Formula One race in a way. Without I think my race is really important and really cool, but it's not a Formula One race. So for us, the event is very, and also our day, we focus everything on only one day. Formula One is 3 days. It's a completely different format, but we want to fill the day with other content. So we have an e-village where fans engage with our sponsors and they see the technology and so on. Formula E is very new technology driven. It's not only for electric cars, but we're including other things. Some of our partners like Qualcomm are doing really cool things. I mean, they have this desk and you charge your phone when you put it on the desk, and and that's how we charge also the safety car. Other companies are showing other things in this area, but everything very focused on new technology. And we found, for example, in Miami, we were totally sold out, and the people spend most of the time on that e-village because what they like is more an event, an experience. Okay, the race is the excuse to come there and it's great, and the race is more the new technology associated to the race than the race. Probably they want to see a race, they go to Formula One. If they want to see new technology, they come to Formula E. Well, I hope. And also music is very important for us. So we have, for example, Felix Jaehn, this 20-year-old guy. He's now number 1 in the UK and in Germany. He's going to be spinning in the race in Germany for all the fans. We had other big DJs coming, and the race in we invite all the fans after to come to the concert with the DJ, etc. So there is this concept of making a whole event, but we have only a one-day experience. So because also we are in the city center, which is the defining element of Formula E. So we need to get in and out quick, not to block the city for a few days.
Matthew, what more do you think Formula One could or should do to engage people when they're actually there at the event?
I think there's a lot of things that Formula E are doing that we can take positives from. And to be honest, I think they probably do it better in some of the new countries that we visit than they do in the existing countries, especially in Europe. For example, in Bahrain, there was a performance after the race by Pitbull, and the fans stayed on, firework displays, the fact that they do the races at night, etc., etc. But in general terms, I think just getting the people that are at the event more involved. I think having free Wi-Fi at the circuits would be a huge step forward. Having a decent app from FOM, which I know they've got an app, but it's £20 or something. Having an app where people could interact, could see what was going on, they could get data, they could see what was going on the circuit. But again, it's we're limited in what we can show, as you touched on before, in terms of moving images, in terms of live feeds. So I guess that kind of thing.
Because, my colleague Jim mentioned earlier that he went to the Chelsea game the other week, and there were people playing on FIFA in the stand while the match was going on. Maybe that's not what we want, but Formula One sounds a million miles away from that, doesn't it, Rob?
No, I think if you look at sports in the States, for example, and how when you walk through the turnstiles to the whole event, there's a lot that goes on around that event. So there are opportunities for the teams and partners to capture a lot of data in that, but enrich that Formula One experience. I think that there is a question over the word participation and engagement. So what can you do at the race to the 100,000 people that are there in attendance? But what can you do? How can you make a much bigger global audience who are watching through TV or following the race on Twitter? How can they feel that they're involved in the sport? And that again comes down to the content strategies and the amount of activation that you are going to do around that event and making them feel closer to the action. We were the first Formula One team to enable a fan to tweet the team directly on the screen in the brand centre in the paddock. We talk about that proximity challenge historically in Formula One. We gave an opportunity for a fan to send a tweet directly to the team with Jenson Button stood in front of the screen reading them. And that's the kind of proactive nature that the teams need the activations we need to do in order to make it participation not just better at the event, but on a global viewing basis.
Well, in Bahrain, Jenson was even tweeting as the race was still going on, wasn't it?
Indeed.
Sadly, he couldn't start. Do we have any questions from the... Sorry to make... I feel like I'm picking on Rob there. It's a bit unfair of me. Do we have any questions from the floor? Yeah. Alan.
Hi, it's a question for Rob and Matthew. Alan Baldwin from Reuters. The Formula One drivers are going to announce an initiative in Monaco next Friday to try and get closer to the fans. It's not quite known what they're proposing. But if you were a fan with no involvement in Formula One, what would be your number one wish to see that the sport would do for you?
I think one of the things that we could, and as I touched on before, I mean, we're quite restricted in what we can show during the actual race and what the drivers can even show. I think from our experience and some of the research we've done, a lot of behind the scenes things seem to be quite interesting to fans. So I think if the drivers can talk a little bit about their sort of build up to a race, what they do just before a race, you know, even things, I mean, we've tweeted stuff where Roman's gone into his room before the race and he showed you around his room and he's looked at sort of his race build-up. I think that kind of thing is probably important. I know they're going to announce something and even my two drivers are keeping tight-lipped about it. I don't know what it is. I don't know what they're going to do.
Yeah, I mean, equally, let's see what that announcement is. If it is asking the audience what do they want more from Formula One perspective, that's what we do every day. You know, we've gone out there and asked our communities, what do you want more of? But equally, the great thing about social media, all the analytics around website usage, app downloads and usage, the data's there. You know, people are voting with their thumbs anyway, so we can determine what's working and what's not working, and that might come down to what time we're putting content out or what channels we're putting content out on, more so than the specific content itself. So it's up to the likes of myself and my digital team to be looking at that data and really understanding, okay, that's what fans want more of. Let's find out how we can get greater access and how we can enrich that experience to provide more of that content.
Just picking up on something you said there, Rob, about timing. I wonder how, and this is an issue for all three of you really, how you go about keeping people interested, engaged when there's not a race on at the weekend, and sometimes in Formula E and Formula One there are 2-week gaps between races or 3 weeks. How do you go about keeping people still interested?
Well, I don't know, we're still figuring it out. It's very difficult because you don't have a race and you need to basically tell these stories between the drivers and what's going on and try to keep the interest up. So basically what we do is we get lots of stories during the race weekend and then we kind of like slowly release them during the week or 2 weeks. But you know, for us in Formula E it's even more difficult. We have only 10 races, so sometimes there is a month and a half between races, and that's really hard because you can feel the momentum going down. Now we have 4 races, one every 2 weeks, and it's much easier. It's very difficult to organize them, but it's much easier to kind of like keep the attention of the people following the championship. But it's definitely the big problem. No?
Are you going to try and have more races next year, or?
Yeah, we're probably going to have to try. Yeah, we're going to have more races next year, but we can only add like 1 or 2 per year because it's a big effort. No, but I mean, better us than the Olympics. They're every 4 years.
Any other questions? Yeah.
Hi, a question for Matthew. There have been some rumours that Renault may be looking to try and buy back the team. I'm just wondering if you knew if there was any truth in that and if there are any discussions taking place currently.
Okay, I know that Renault are evaluating their role within F1 at the moment. So I think they are, from a fairly high level, trying to decide whether or not they just make engines, whether they pull out the sport altogether, or whether or not they look back at taking over a works team. From our point of view, my shareholders have said quite specifically the team isn't for sale. I took a huge step the middle of last season to move to Mercedes engines, to break a long link that we'd had with Renault. And it's certainly not something that from a team's point of view that we would be looking to head back. We signed a deal with Mercedes until 2020. And that was specifically done to run until these engine regulations change. So from my side, I mean, I guess there's a famous quote that everything's for sale at a price. But certainly the shareholders have told me they don't want to sell the team. They don't want to give up their majority interest in the team. And we believe that with the Mercedes power unit that we've put in the car now, that we're giving ourselves a chance to perform as we should do.
This isn't directly related to that, but Formula One seems to have this phenomenal ability at the moment of the stuff it does put out to fans and sends out them to try and engage with is of quite a negative tone. You can blame me and Alan and Ben in the press, or you can. Yep. There's all manner of things that are responsible for it. Do you feel like sometimes you're fighting against a tide almost?
I guess a little bit. I mean, again, I've only been there since last January, but I'd certainly from from a Lotus point of view, and I can only really speak from a Lotus point of view, it's very easy for everyone to talk about financial problems, for small team syndrome, for our drivers, who our drivers are, what our drivers bring, etc., etc. Whereas, for example, in the last few weeks, we've released our draft accounts, which have shown that we went from losing £64 million in 2013 to losing £3 in 2014. And it's kind of gone under the radar. And that it annoys me because that's my job. That's the bit that I've done. And I think, you know, it's, again, that's the nature of journalism, isn't it? I mean, you know, bad stories sell, you know, negative stuff sells. And at the moment, especially in Formula One, the only positive stories really are surrounding Mercedes, and I guess they've been written to death. So everyone's looking for something else to talk about. So I can't blame you for anything, but you know, it's difficult because, you know, you look up and down the pit lane and there's 10 teams there that are desperately trying. You know, there's 500 people that work back at our factory, and we're a reasonably small team. And again, just to touch back on one of the comments you were saying earlier on about in between the races, that's something that since I've been there in January of last year, what goes on behind the scenes, I don't think is told enough. And that's something that we've certainly tried to do in between the races because, you know, we've got 500 people back at the factory, you know, McLaren a hell of a lot more, Red Bull more than that. And, you know, those people sit there and they work 24/7 to get those cars ready. You know, the cars landed back from Spain and they're leaving again for Monaco on Tuesday. You know, and that whole story behind the scenes is incredibly powerful. It's incredibly emotional. You know, the guys that work with us, it's quite, all the teams are all the UK-based teams, so 8 of the 10 teams are very, very close together. There's a fair bit of movement that goes on between the teams, but then there's kind of a hard core of people that just live and breathe. Certainly with us, they live and breathe Enstone as an entity. And there's a great story there. There's great passion there, and sometimes I think that should be told a bit more, maybe.
Rob, what's your take on that? I mean, looking at Formula E and what Alejandro's been able to do, by all accounts, pretty much speak to anyone, they've done a very good job of how they market themselves, and Formula One famously doesn't have its own marketing department per se. So what's your take on that?
Yeah, I mean, I can only speak from a McLaren point of view, but we can see the growth in our social communities, the growth in traffic to McLaren.com, the amount of downloads of our mobile app. The audience is growing, and you know, Formula One is a conversation that is happening aggressively online during the course of a race, and increasingly so now between the races, and it's up to McLaren and Lotus and the other teams to tell those stories and fill in the blanks in between it, because there is an incredible story to tell about the development that goes on and the logistical challenge, if nothing else, of Formula One.
Any other questions? Yeah, lady here.
Hi. Formula One is an incredibly technology-driven sport with all the telemetry data that's available to fans. How much more data can you share with us without giving away all your secrets?
Lewis Hamilton famously tweeted Jenson Button's telemetry a few years ago, so maybe that got him in a bit of trouble. So.
Again, it's difficult. There's a hell of a lot more that we could share. But our guys, as we just talked about, the guys that are back at the factory that live and breathe it, are so precious about anything. I mean, you'll see us, last weekend when Roman's car fell to pieces on the straight, our mechanics dived around the back of it to stop anyone taking pictures. So I was on the pit wall and I came off and I said, what can they see? And it's only our exhaust. So there was nothing there, but it's just, there's this absolute, preciousness about everything that goes on. And that's just the bits you can see from the outside. And it's the one-upmanship, it's an arms race of development, and it's, my guys are paranoid that, we finish a race, and instead of sitting back and saying, right, okay, we were the 4th fastest team last weekend, if our 2 drivers hadn't have come together, maybe things would have been different, but with the 4th fastest team, so everything's good, we can sit and relax a little bit, and we know that Toro Rosso are developing, we know that Sauber are developing, and it's this constant race, and therefore we do shut down on the information. And it's something that was talked about last year in strategy group as to whether or not there are more things that we could do. And I think we did this year with is this year the first year that they were showing the amount of fuel that you'd use during the race, and I think to do with the amount of battery power that we had left, etc., etc. So there's certain things, and it has to come from FOM and FIA, unfortunately, because if you leave it to the teams and you just say you put out what you want, then no one's going to do it. Whereas if it's given as a direct, you have to supply this information, then the teams will do it.
Do you tell your teams what sort of data and telemetry they should put out, Alejandro?
Well, yeah, but the teams get very little. So the thing is, we have obviously not the same amount of data. We don't have telemetry. Telemetry is not allowed in general for teams to control the cost. Because if you have telemetry, you need a guy on the other side of the screen watching, and you have like 40 telemetries, you have 40 guys watching at the screens. So we have no telemetry. We have just a little bit of data coming out, but it's the same data that we show with the fans. So the fans and the guy in the pit wall sees the same amount of data. And the battery level is actually not exact. So the FIA doesn't release the exact amount of battery. Only the driver can see the battery he has, and the teams and the fans see an approximate figure.
I mean, just to add to that, you're absolutely right. It is a telemetry-rich and data-rich sport, and that's kind of what separates Formula One and motorsports from the rest. It's not always a question of how much more can you give away, but how can you better translate the technology and data story that you do tell, either through what you're putting out on social or what the guys on commentary are talking about. How can you make that more accessible, more relatable to the real world? Because there's a certain amount of advantage to be gained through telling those stories in a relatable way. So it's our content strategies. One of the things that we want to do more of is to try and make the complex sport that is Formula One as accessible to a broader audience as possible, because we recognise where glass ceilings come in, and if we can continue to break through those glass ceilings by making the sport and McLaren more and more accessible, then obviously we'll recruit more people into our brand, and only for the benefit of Formula One as well.
There's a question from the lady in red.
We've touched on it, Sophie Morris from Mill Harbour Marketing. We've touched on it briefly about fan engagement at the track itself. My experience is only of Silverstone, but my belief is that there's no fan experience or live experience away from the race on the outside of the track. So the first team to do that has the opportunity to win the hearts of a lot of fans, which would then be amplified on social media, which would then add more value to sponsors. So I guess my question is, are you actually restricted from doing that, or is it something that you would consider?
So, if the question is in terms of demonstrations and events, perhaps, that are hosted, we've done a number of those over the years with partners across the globe, and they are very, very popular, and it brings Formula One into the community a little bit more. Obviously, you couldn't take the current car out on track into the streets because it is this season's car. But we have demo cars, and we try and make use of those, usually in collaboration with one of our partners to hold events. But it goes back to that point around accessibility and how much you proactively engage as a team across the platforms that you do have to really make fans feel part of the experience. So whether it be in or outside of a race weekend, if it's 2 o'clock on Sunday, not only are they going to switch on the TV or whatever means of which they're watching the race, but they're going to open the McLaren app, or they're going to go onto Twitter. We've heard from Twitter that something like 80% of sports fans engage in Twitter whilst the event is on. So there's an opportunity there to take sport into the news feeds and onto the devices of the fans.
Did you mean actually outside the track itself? So like at a football match, if you're standing outside the ground, they might have screens up. I think is that what you meant?
Yes, I think a few years ago Santander would do a pit stop challenge, so you get to change it. So an experience away from the race that would give someone a once in a lifetime maybe, or just a great experience that they would then share.
Within the confines of within the circuit parameters, we are strictly governed on what we can do. Santander are a sponsor of FOM as well as one of the teams. So we're strictly controlled. There's a thing called the F1 game zone, is it? Or the fan zone. There's areas that they do, but the guys that run those pay a lot of money to FOM to have those areas there. So we can't really we can't really do anything. We do run events outside of Silverstone's a fairly good example. There's not much outside of Silverstone. So during Silverstone weekend, we run a thing in London. There's a Grand Prix race weekend in London, and we've got a couple of our cars down there, and our drivers will go down. So we do run events, but as we were saying just then, it's more partner orientated. It's more for our sponsors rather than for the fans, I guess. One of the things that we did recently, which we were talking about earlier, was we did a filming day in Brands Hatch 2 weeks ago. And we only really told people about it through Twitter on the day of the actual event, because it's just a filming day. It was just the car was only going to be out on track for a few hours, and we ended up getting 2,500 people there because it was free entry, because they were going to go and see a car. So these events do work, but it's just carefully sort of judging how best to do them and where to do them.
But the teams are actually restricted on the race weekend doing
Within Silverstone, if you like, yeah. In and around Silverstone, in and around the circuit, in the surrounding areas, yeah. It's, as I say, game zone and fan zone. They actually pay money to run those sort of, and I think they do pit stop challenges, and they do simulator challenges, and they try and get the race drivers to go down there, and the race drivers set times on the simulators. So those things do go on in and around the circuit.
We got one final question. Well, I'll just. Oh, yeah, Tom.
You've spoken a lot about engaging fans, trying to increase your Twitter followers, your Facebook followers, and your social media profiles, etc. But at the same time, the sport itself is losing fans, or seems to be. The television audiences are down. Fewer fans are going, as Daniel touched upon at the start. There's no German Grand Prix this year. In the heartlands of Formula One in Europe, there are fewer fans. Is this move towards new technology and into new marketplaces, is there a risk that you're losing your core audience, with each move towards whatever it is, whether it's hybrid technologies or, KERS technology and all these newfangled technologies, you're losing what, the essence of the sport, and you're alienating your core fan base?
I can only speak on behalf of Lotus and on behalf of the teams, and we can't control that. So, I've been quite vocal about it in the past, but, we're told what sort of engine we put in the back of our car. It's of no benefit to us, and we have to put that engine in there. By the same token, FOM and the governing body decides where the races are going to go based on cash, based on facilities, based on logistics. So we as a team can't really, we have no bearing on that. So all we can try and do to keep people involved and to try and keep reaching out, to reach out to the people that we believe are going to be the people that are watching the sport in the future, is to do it via social media and to do it via Twitter and Facebook. There's not much more we can do, and we can't. Okay, I'm not going to comment on any of that. Yeah.
You could join Formula E.
Absolutely.
Well, they run a team in Formula E.
Yes.
They run on one of the teams in Formula E.
You've kind of got inside and outside perspective on Formula One. What do you think of Tom's question? What's your view on the way it's going?
Well, I think it's a very important question. I think it's a question that everybody is asking themselves right now in Formula One. I'm always very, very careful not to, criticize Formula One or anything like that, because I don't want to be seen doing that. We're Formula E and we are big Formula One fans, but there is definitely something there to be done, and it's not a simple problem because, Formula One has an incredible. Where we look for technology, we found it in Formula One. McLaren makes our motors, Williams make our batteries. And for example, we don't have telemetry, but Formula One without telemetry wouldn't be Formula One. So Formula One the standard is so high that it makes it difficult to survive. So you need so much to be a Formula One team and to be in Formula One, because the level of Formula One is so extremely high. But for that, to sustain that, you need a lot of fans watching. So a lot of sponsors will come and put a lot of money into it. And you need a lot of cities who want it and pay a lot of money to Bernie, and then Bernie can redistribute the money to the teams. And if that circle is not working well, it's very difficult to continue, and it may collapse. So, it's a really, really difficult problem to solve. But luckily, I'm in Formula E, not in Formula One, so it's not me to solve it. But But yeah, it's a very, very complicated question what you say, because it's difficult to change because there is so much tradition and the technology is so fantastic. But on the other hand, how can you keep it going in a world that is probably changing, and those sponsors that used to pay 50 or 100 million now want to pay 5? So, you know.
Well, on that slightly downbeat note, that brings our session to an end. I thank Alejandro, Rob and Matthew for joining us. Thank you.